Today's game is one that took last February by storm and ran away with it. It was an unexpected smash hit. Valheim. It's a game made by a relatively small development team. It's a sandboxy open-world co-op with up to 10 players on the world. The world scales based off of how many players are in the world. It's a third-person hack-and-slash, for lack of a better word. And with its extremely high rating on Steam and countless positive reviews, it's suggesting that Valheim is a perfect game. Valheim is a bit of a mixed bag in the terms of looks. At first glance, it looks great. The colors are bright, vibrant, and tastefully done. Upon further inspection, some of the models and textures are low poly and low res. Meanwhile, other ones like the skeletons and the wolves seem to be almost perfect. It's kind of weird. Weather in Valheim comes and goes naturally, and the thunderstorms are superb. The trees sway in the wind, the sound, it all goes accordingly. Meanwhile, the blizzard in the mountain biome, the only thing it does is look bad and attack my frame rate. It's a targeted attack on my 3080. It performs significantly worse than anything else in the game, oddly. Next is the soundtrack. It's great overall, but it runs out of gas very quickly. There's only like 2 tracks, if that, per biome. Some of it's just reused as well. Others are just essentially default ambient music for a video game. And others are just great. It's really hit or miss. Combat in Valheim is solid. Most of the hits and effects feel correct. There's good player feedback on what hits and what doesn't. It's all what you would expect. Weapon variety is a bit of a sore spot though, mainly focusing on swords, spears, and maces, but you can't use spears because they have a really stupid looking animation, so you just can't do it without cringing the whole time. It's a Viking game and there's only like 4 axes to choose from and they're really not that good. The sword is objectively better since the animation with the left-right slash makes it way easier to hit the target. All the sword animations are super centralized directly in front of you. So if the enemy's not directly in front of you, you don't hit them. Player durability and maximum stamina is determined not by your level or gear or progression, but instead by the available food that you can eat, each one having a focus on either health or stamina or maybe a little of both. This makes progression in terms of max health and stamina based on the type of food you currently have available to eat. The downside to this is sometimes you'll need to grind something you had no idea you would need, so you were never picking it up and figured the item was useless and have to backtrack. Like for example, the thistles in the Black Forest. They're used in one of the best meat recipes. Since it works this way, unless you stockpile, you may sometimes lose progress and have to backtrack to these previous biomes to gather these materials. Once you know this and gather basically everything you can on your second playthrough, it's totally fine and you'll likely never run out, but it's kind of a beginner's trap. Each food lasts for a predetermined amount of time based off of the individual food. For whatever reason, after the duration of the food is half expired, you lose a lot of the benefit. It encourages you to eat another, wasting half of the duration. The only reason why it's this way is to simply waste the player's resources to ensure they spend more time playing to gather the resources again to use them. This artificially lengthens the game. This term of artificially lengthening the game, get used to it. It's a bit of a trend in Valheim. While during combat, managing health can be difficult, it's pretty easy to get just whacked. It will always be easier than managing your stamina. Stamina can be extremely annoying to manage, seeing as almost all actions except for like walking requires it. You can get a rested buff that makes it recover a lot faster, but the way the rested buff works is it's like if you're near like nice furniture, campfire inside of a building and stuff like that, but it only gives you a predetermined amount of time based off of how high level of comfort you have in the house. Without this rested buff, it takes ages to recover. And on top of that, at night, without protection, you'll be cold. This reduces the regen of stamina and health significantly. If the player gets wet, you get like a 2-minute debuff that does the same thing. Both of these debuffs can be extremely detrimental to survival and just simply trying to walk back to base to go to sleep. Again, this is just to waste the player's time. Even little things like farming and planting crops uses stamina. Running up a tiny little hill uses stamina. Sometimes you'll just try to run uphill and you'll have to just stand there and wait for like 10 seconds for your stupid stamina to regen so you can go up this tiny little section of hill because it was just barely too steep for you to walk up it normally and you didn't have the stamina to sprint up it. One major aspect and a lot of people's favorite is the base building in Valheim. It's actually extremely good how well it works. With its easy to use freeform building tool, there's actual like physics trying to determine whether your building is structurally sound. I've seen plenty of people who are far more creative than I am build like really huge cool structures that are just as functional as they look. You can like find pictures of somebody who built like miniatures from Lord of the Rings in Valheim. I'm not really sure why you would spend that much time, but you do you. Campfires, however, can't be placed on anything but dirt for some reason. Like I can't put it on stone or something. That's weird. And a bed has to be near one. So basically you get around this by walling in a tiny little dirt section in the middle of your house, and well, campfires also emit smoke. You got a vent. If it's stuck inside the house, it'll choke you or your fire to death. You also can like shape the ground, you can raise, lower it, flatten it. However, the included tool's a little jank. Sometimes it removes a ton, other times it doesn't remove much. And use the flatten tool and it doesn't really flatten very much. It's a little inconsistent, but all in all, it's not really that big of a deal. It works. Progression of gear and weapons comes from a linear path of materials, starting with leather and like flint and stuff like that. Then you move on to metals like bronze and iron. Tools can also be made out of these materials. Axes unlock harder trees that give you different types of wood to use. Each biome has its own types of ores, and to get to the next ore, you have to beat the boss of the current biome you're in. Bosses are unique to each biome. Some of these were a total walk in the park, while other ones are actually kind of hard. Each one of these drops a trophy, as well as a few other things. These trophies can be placed at your actual original spawn point where the bird drops you off to unlock a buff. The buffs have a 5-minute duration and a 20-minute cooldown. Some of these buffs are amazing, like one of them gives you always tailwind while in a boat, 60% stamina reduction while the duration. Other ones, meanwhile, are just kind of like a percentage DR that's kind of lame. Exploring the map to find new biomes, bosses, and regions can be a bit daunting of a task. The map is enormous. Shortly in, you unlock portals. These let you traverse the map extremely quickly after you make the trek once. Just make 2 portals, give them the same name, and they're linked. However, you can't teleport a few specific items, mainly being ores and bars, and later on an item required to spawn one of the bosses that's extremely heavy. You can really only carry one at a time, and you need 3. This, coupled with the insane demand for ores and bars to create tools and gear, and the inability to teleport them, can create an extremely tedious grind for essentially no reason. There's basically no good reason outside of intentionally wasting the player's time to artificially lengthen the game again. These gears you want to make can be extremely expensive too. The base material is a lot, and the ability to upgrade them makes it even more expensive, seeing as each time the upgrade requires bars or other materials they're base made out of, and fully upgraded gear makes it almost twice as good. This puts bars and ores and other base materials extremely high in demand, and again, you can't teleport them. Now you may be thinking, I'll just carry it, I'll just walk. Well, they're really heavy, so you can only carry like 20 bars maybe, give or take. Essentially what the developer wants you to do is use one of the two types of vehicles in the game, with one being a cart and the other one being a boat. You pull the cart with your character and the boat, the water pulls you. The wind, actually. Moving on. Both of these come with huge drawbacks. The cart doesn't really traverse untamed land very well, it's easy to flip, and it's pretty slow. The boat, unless you're in a tailwind, is even slower. The compass on your radar shows you which way the wind's blowing. However, even with a tailwind, the boat's still actually pretty slow. And if you're sailing on this enormous map, you could actually, no exaggeration, be sailing for a half hour. What a waste of time. Just let me teleport it. Now, map generation in Valheim is procedural, meaning it's totally random, determined by a seed of either a string of numbers or words converted into numbers. This is great for replayability, seeing as the map will almost always be different from your last playthrough. However, it can also mean that the random generation can be extremely unforgiving. For example, one of the must-have items in Valheim is the Nord belt. That has a dumb name, but it increases your carry weight by 150. This is like 15 bars. Remember, you can only carry like 30 before. It's actually probably less than that. I didn't do the math. But this is a 33% increase over your base carry weight. However, it can only be obtained by trading with the trader, who will only spawn in one of very few places and only in the dark forest biome. It's extremely rare for the trader to be even remotely close to you, and without a map viewer, he will almost in every single case be extremely difficult to find. On my map, I had very few swamps, so I used the fastest boat to ride around and try to find more. I was looking for iron, not the trader. It was a giant waste of time, seeing as all the swamps I could find were really small and had like no underground crypts. The underground crypts is where you gather iron-based material. In the end, I used a map viewer to determine where the trader was on my map and where a large swamp were, so I could progress without wandering around aimlessly for maybe even hours. Bosses also like to spawn extremely far away from the spawn. Some of them are a literal 20-minute boat ride away. And with one of them later needing that same item that you couldn't teleport and weighs a ton, means that not only you'll have to ride the boat 20 minutes, maybe even longer, you're also going to have to do several walks from the boat to the spawn point for the boss. Again, this artificially lengthens the game for no reason. Interestingly enough, sometimes while you're sailing, you'll encounter hostile sea serpents, that when you kill them, their scales sink to the bottom of the ocean, because why wouldn't they? But however, the meat that they drop floats at the top, and it's some of the best meat in the game. One way you can get their scales, and the only way I know of, is to make an item that allows you to hook enemies to you, and you drag it onto the shore and slap it. The other thing you can find while sailing is leviathans. These guys have, like, mineable parts on their back. That makes some of the really good items in the game, but these guys are pretty rare and they don't respawn. Also, when you start mining the things on their back, they get mad and go away. So you may not even get all the nodes on them. So again, you might want to use a map viewer just to see where they are, because they don't respawn and there's not many of them. There's also like RuneScape stats in Valheim. Basically everything you do gives you skills that can range from reducing stamina cost or increasing damage dealt. These are diminished on death, and not only reset the current progress to level on death, but also reduce the current level that you have. Now, a huge problem with the size of the map, limited travel options causing you to maybe not upgrade your items since it takes so long, and the high base cost of the items originally, is the death system. All of your items fall onto the ground in a neat little tombstone that drops on the floor when you die. These can be recovered. However, plenty of times these tombstones can be in extremely dangerous locations. You died fully geared. How would the developer expect you to perform without anything? One touch of your stone, you get everything back, as well as some of the stats you lost, and a bit of a run speed buff. However, recovering your items sometimes can be extremely difficult since, again, they're in really dangerous locations. Let's say you die in the mountain, for example. Sure hope you got frost resistance potions to reclaim your gear, because the second you walk in there, you start freezing to death. Also, the enemies that spawn there are pretty dangerous with your gear on already. The plains are also a great example of this terrible mechanic. I'm sure the dead skeetos have claimed a ton of people, geared and ungeared, doing a corpse run. Basically, these monsters are little mosquitoes that are extremely fast and hit you for a lot of damage. Essentially, they've only got 1 health, so if you hit them with anything, they die. But getting your gear back in this situation boils down to either getting lucky and nothing spawns, or you cheat and just fly to it. If you don't go either of these routes, you can lose several hours of progress having to backtrack, unless of course, you had the foresight to waste even more time grinding materials to make 2 or 3 additional sets of gear, instead of upgrading yours, making you a little bit more durable and maybe saving your life. Again, if you do both, this artificially lengthens the game for, again, no reason. Several actions in Valheim also take forever for no reason as well. The first metal you gain access to is bronze, which if you live under a rock, it's an alloy of copper and tin. Mining copper takes several minutes per node, and in the end may not even give you enough for 1 piece of gear or an upgrade for a previously made piece. The copper is even partially buried under the floor, so it wastes your durability on your pickaxe just to clear the dirt out of the way so you can get to the ore. This increases the chances that you have to return to a forge and repair your tool, making you do 2 trips. This, coupled with the insane travel distance to even have access to base materials, extremely high carry weight of the ores and bars, and the teleport lock, again, artificially lengthens the game. Valheim, one of the biggest problems with it is the huge lack of content. There really isn't many NPCs or animals at all, both hostile and neutral. There's only 1 that's friendly by default. Each biome only has like 3 NPCs, with some of them being reused from previous ones, like deer in the Black Forest or skeletons in the Black Forest and the swamp. Mountains is just a wolf and a drake mob. Plains is just goblins and then most gators. Most biomes in the game only have like 1, maybe 2 neutral NPCs or animals. They really could have had more biomes, more NPCs, more animals, more optional content that offers side grades, or something a little different like they kind of did with the Leviathan. Basically, you follow a super linear path progression biome to biome. You kill the bosses in each one after another, where instead there could have just been just as many optional biomes that offered side grade materials, foods, things that just are not clear-cut upgrades over the last one, encouraging more playstyles instead of just a linear path that's basically use the sword or the mace and the bow and not really much else. They could have incorporated some sort of like magic forest or something that gives like spell casting with like unique trees you cut down to make like staves and stuff like that. Or like a place that's a forest but it's overly lush and jungle-like and has lots of different types of like poison-based weapons and hostile NPCs and flora and fauna. Instead, we have 5 biomes that in a lot of cases are actually really similar and don't have a whole lot going on inside of them, except for the swamp. That one's very different. Valheim really could use an update of the size of the current game. Look at Terraria. They could really use something similar to that. They basically doubled the content with the game's release, with the hard mode release, and then whatever the third one was called, I don't remember. Each time, they basically doubled the content. The developer of Valheim has promised 4 major content updates within the first year. It's January. They promised it last February. They shot a bit too high. They've only finished 1 so far, and that one is by far the smallest of them all. Valheim is actually a really great concept and foundation. It's very clear that it was released before it was totally complete. However, not in the normal ways we've come to expect. Performance is acceptable overall, although it can be a bit lower than you would expect with the visual fidelity of the game. In my 2 playthroughs, I experienced maybe a single bug, a single crash, very few issues overall outside of the blizzard and the mountain attacking my frame rate. Valheim, however, is a one-trick pony. A lot of things are really only cool a single time, only really fun a single time. Without updates and content, replaying it is kind of pointless, and it offers very little overall in the terms of replay value. Valheim, however, has mod support though. These mods can range from barely doing anything to adding a ton of content. One of the mods I installed adds rarity and enchantments to items. This adds a ton of depth that the game really should have had from the get-go. Another mod removes the stupid teleport block on items. This has literally saved me hours. However, in the end, Valheim does offer quite a bit of content for its extremely reasonable price tag of $20. And in the end, I did enjoy it and recommend buying it. Just do yourself the favor, install the mods that strip all the stupid time wasters out, like not being able to teleport ores. There really is no logical reason to have this in the game outside of intentionally wasting the player's time. I'm really interested to see where the mod community takes Valheim, as well as the main developer itself. Hopefully, they can get to a schedule that works and doesn't just abandon ship now that they've got everyone's money, because they totally could. They sold like 6 million copies. That's a pretty significant portion of Steam. There's not a whole lot of customers they could be hitting with those new releases. As always, thank you for watching the video. If you have a comment about the video or suggestions on the next game to play, please leave it below. If you like the video, leave it a like.